次の願いが私を呼んでいるわ。
Alright, so before we get into this, I have to give a huge shout out and thank you to JetWolf for doing all the video editing, because I couldn't. Yeah, this is going to look a lot better than anything normally, because I'm not that great at editing. I can cut and I can paste, and that's about it, and I can barely do that. So yeah, the editing to this is going to be a lot nicer. So once again, huge shout out to JetWolf. I will put up a link in a card to his channel, and maybe he'll put up a little text link and picture of his channel just so we make sure it's branded on this video. But anyway, yeah, thanks JetWolf. Anyway, this is Pup Breeder, a game that I, judging by that title, would say is not meant for children, but it's got a green sticker on the logo, which means it's good for everyone. Now, if you're like me, judging by that name, you'd probably think it's some sort of dog raising simulator where you have to get a dog and breed them together to create some sort of ultimate show dog, which, spoilers, would absolutely hands down be a German Shepherd, let's just be real here, and win all the dog trophies or something, right? Well, if that's what you thought, yeah, this game isn't anything like that at all. In fact, it's kind of a betrayal of its core title, because this is an RTS that contains neither breeding or pups. Yeah, there's no dogs in this game. Don't really get that either. When you start, you get to pick your girl of choice. I guess this is your trainer of sorts. All this really affects, as far as I can tell, is really which girl yells at your animals while you command them on the field. Then you get to pick your stable of creatures. There's actually quite a lot to go from here. No pups. Confusing, I know, but there are cats, there are pangolins. Shoutouts to one of the few games that recognizes pangolins out there. I love pangolins, they're great. You also get what I believe are ocean sunfish, and they sound exactly like you imagine an ocean sunfish sounds like. And it's delightful. You have what I think is supposed to be birds, or maybe some kind of blowfish creature, it's a little hard to tell, as well as turtles. All of these creatures come in different colors to delineate which version of that creature it is. You could fill out an entire team with like all the different colors of one type, I suppose, if that's what you want to do, but they all have different stats and abilities. I just picked one of everything just so I could show off all the different creatures because it looked the most interesting to me. After you select your team, you are then presented with an option as to which mission you want to choose. You've got an option of up to 3 at a time, and yeah, I took a translation app on my phone to take a photo of this just to see what like one of these quests would actually be, and yeah, not actually helpful in any meaningful way. But I can tell you that pretty much every quest devolves down to kill every enemy on screen before the time runs out. There are a few modifications of this rule, such as one level which was filled with infinitely spawning Zakus, where you have to go and kill the boss enemies that are running around the map, as well as one mission where I had to defend an egg from X number of creatures. But by and large, it's usually just run around and take out every enemy on the map. Once you begin a round of this game, you are given some time to set up. You can then take this time to select every character and give them a command as to what you want them to initially do. And then something weird kind of happens because it's not tied to giving each and every unit a command like I would have initially thought. Instead, it's actually a timing thing, which can lead to a weird situation where it can start after you give every single character a command and you have to just sort of sit there and think, alright, is my Saturn just failing to load the actual level, or what's going on here? Or it can also lead to a situation where you're so indecisive about how you want to start this map that the game starts before you issue every character a command, and the game will just sort of start on its own, because while this game is an RTS, it sort of plays itself on autopilot a little bit. The initial goal is to give them a basic direction and they'll wander off, usually, and they tend to gravitate towards objectives. If there's an item in their way, they'll go out of their way and grab it, or, you know, fight an enemy, if it's not directly in their path. It gives them a sense that you don't have to immediately micromanage every single little thing. The flip side of that, however, is sometimes they just sort of actively ignore things that you request of them. And saying that out loud gives me immediate flashbacks to Pac-Man 2: The New Adventures. Ugh. And when that happens, you feel like you have no direct control over them, and that is when this game gets a little frustrating. When this happens, you can issue a command to each character that you're, angry with them, and they'll smarten up and listen to your next command. Getting angry at them is like a big X, and there's a big circle, which is an approval command, but selecting that doesn't seem to really do anything. Like, I feel like that command is only in this game because the antithesis also is, and it actually has a point. It's not like approving of their actions when they do what you ask them seems to make them obey more. And this whole situation seems to just be attempting to throw sort of a AI training aspect to it. It's sort of trying to create a feel of you trying to accurately teach them what you want them to do so they do it better and faster and without more direct intervention. But that never seems to actually be the case. It's more just, if they don't do what you like, tell them off, and then give them the command again and they'll do it. And that's about the extent that mechanic ever really goes, or at least that's how it felt when I played it. Likewise, sometimes they can just stop performing entirely. As you can see underneath their individual health bar, they also have an energy bar, and when that runs out, they just sort of fall over and take a nap. And you just sort of have to sit there and wait for them to deal with that. You can command them sometimes to get up early, but they're not going to have very much health, so they'll probably just fall over again. And an enemy can hit them while they're knocked out, so you don't really want to get them ever in a situation like that. Now, to balance that out and try and combat that fatigue, however, there are items. Items tend to come in about two flavors. They either come in weapons, either a giant mallet or a paper fan, or they appear as fruit, and there's like bananas and apples. The items seem to do the same thing regardless of which classification they are. Items pretty much entirely restore your character's fatigue so that they can just get up and continue doing what they do without taking a nap, and weapons just make you do more damage faster. And while the AI is smart enough to pick up these items, they don't really ever equip any of this stuff on their own. Instead, you still have to micromanage that, which is a little bit peculiar, but at the same time, it does give you the control of giving each and every character whatever item you want. So if you've got one character that's off on the left side of the map picking up random items, and there's like a big brawl on the right side of the map, you can give your character the item on the right side of the map and be perfectly fine. I do appreciate this, but it does call into question the actual intelligence and attempt at training these guys that the game seems to be going for. Otherwise, in spite of the fact that there are a few variances of the mission, every mission is basically just direct your team to the various opponents and kill them. Underneath your character on the top left corner, you can see a number. That's the total number of objectives you need to do, or, monsters you need to kill effectively. And once you reduce that number to 0, you win. And that's basically every single level. This game tends to favor trying to figure out the optimal strategy for any situation because you are on a set time limit. The timer's in the top center of the screen, and you basically have to finish the objectives before that timer hits 0. That works out well enough, although the timer is a bit unclear as to exactly how much time you've got. But the key aspect to doing well in this game is finding out the optimal way to delegate your commands to your various creatures so that you can cover as much of the map and take out as many objectives as quickly as possible. And it does get a little bit tricky. You do have to still micromanage and actively figure out the strategy behind it, and you have to do so on the fly. And enemies don't just stand around, they wander around because they are monsters. So you kind of have to figure out, okay, this monster's here, I have to delegate whichever character can get there fastest, I have to cover that side of the map at the same time. There's a lot of on-the-fly strategizing, and it is a lot of fun to figure it out. As well as a lot of exasperation when your monsters decide to take a nap or just straight up disobey you and you're hopping between different objectives trying to cover everything. It's a little overwhelming at times and a little bit frustrating when you see on your map that one of your units is just sitting around doing nothing. But at the same time, it does feel good when you get it down right. And it does really actively require you to make those strategies, because the last level I played, I lost. And it's because I played really loose with the rules. It's just like, okay, there's so many enemies. All right, I'll just send a character to every sort of point on the map, and hopefully they'll kind of cover that quadrant and it'll be fine. And ultimately, I just sort of let it go just to see how well it would handle things on its own, and it lost. So credit where credit's due. The AI isn't exactly perfect, and it does require you to strategize and scold them for when they're not listening. I did notice one thing in the game that kind of bugged me gameplay-wise, and that was just sometimes, weirdly, like the game would jump back a few milliseconds to before you made like a selection of a character. Like you'd select a character and they'll jump back a sec, then you have to reselect it. Like it just takes a moment to understand that you actually did select the character and tell them to do something. It didn't happen often, but it did happen every now and then, and it was just kind of weird that the game almost felt like it was running ahead of itself or something. But that was really the only big issue I found while playing this game. It's not a complicated game, it's not super difficult, but it does require you to still think about optimal strategies in order to play well, and it will punish you for not doing that, and that's appreciated. And while the mission structure is basically entirely identical from start to finish with a few exceptions, While pretty much all the levels seem to be just kill all the enemies, they do give you quite a few variations of all the different enemies you can run into, and that's really, really cool. Overall, I wouldn't say that the gameplay to Pup Breeder is all that fantastic. It's not the most strategic game ever, but at the same time, everything is displayed using pictures, and aside from mission objectives being a giant wall of text, you know, everything is easily understandable without needing any sort of Japanese translation. That makes this game pretty accessible for those who are not capable of reading Japanese, like me. I would say overall, gameplay-wise, it's definitely a decent import. It's not a fantastic game gameplay-wise, but it's approachable, and it might be fun for a playthrough or two. The overall presentation to Pup Breeder is pretty solid. Each of the individual animals is bright and colorful. Like I said, every type of animal has like 5 different colors, so you got a wide variety of things to look at, even if you pick all the same type. Every stage introduces a bunch of different enemies, so like even though most stages are basically annihilate all enemies, like I said, they like to throw a bunch of curveballs and different enemies at you, so they keep it fresh, and that's good. While the stages themselves are designed slightly differently, the overall map tile set and the like is just, it's basically very similar regardless of where you go. There isn't a ton of variance to the actual like map visuals, and that's a bit unfortunate, however. Audio-wise, the soundtrack is perfectly fine. It's not going to be the most memorable soundtrack ever, but it's definitely upbeat and it works for what it needs to do. Side note, you can listen to the entire soundtrack on Jet Wolf's channel, and you should definitely go do that, because it is quite good. I do think that the sound effects are tuned a little bit loud, and I do think that the chattering anime girls are a little bit annoying. There's just a little bit too much of it. I think they could have toned down how many voice clips you hear within X period of time by a substantial amount and not hurt the game in any meaningful way. I do appreciate the different voice clips for the animals. Like I said, the Sunfish is pretty great. Sounds exactly like what you would expect a Sunfish to sound like. Overall, the presentation to Pup Breeder is really quite good. Now, if you want a copy of Pup Breeder on the Sega Saturn, cheapest copy I'm seeing on eBay right now is about $20, which is substantially more than what I paid for it. I think I ended up paying maybe $3 or $4 for this. Though it should be noted, there aren't a lot of copies on eBay. This doesn't seem like a game that too many people even know about to resell it. And after the first 2 copies, it jumps up substantially in price. Holy crap, after like the first 2 instances I saw, it like jumps to $100, which, wow, I wouldn't pay that for this game. But if you can get it cheap, it's not too bad. And it's not a bad little RTS. The nice thing is it's very approachable if you can't read the language, which is definitely a big pro. It's not the most complicated game ever, and I don't really necessarily like the whole auto-playing aspect it has, but at the very least it means you don't have to micromanage every single little thing. So there are drawbacks as well as benefits. And while most of the stages are basically inherently at their core the same, they do throw enough things at you to keep it fresh that it's definitely worth a playthrough if you're interested in RTSs and you can get it for a good price. I wouldn't say this is anywhere near the most necessary import Saturn game in any collection, but it's a nice little game to pad out your collection, and it's a decent little import that no one really has talked about. I think Pup Breeder is not a fantastic game, but it is a fun little interesting way to spend an afternoon.
お利口さんよ。この時計狂ってるんじゃないの？